I'm very happy and very honored to welcome 4 distinguished guests on this panel who will have a lot to tell us about one of the key problems in the energy transition in general and the question of nuclear in particular, because as we will see, nuclear is very often seen as a very expensive thing to build that provides then very cheap electricity on the long run. And how we can rethink the way of investing in nuclear and what it means for the future is something I'm going to discuss in greater detail with the distinguished members of the panel. I start with Princess Mthombeni, the founder of Africa for Nuclear. There is very often the argument being made that the developing world and sub-Saharan Africa, that they should jump over one development step. The argument is right, they should skip the fossil age, they should skip nuclear and should go right all renewables. They should go right all to solar, all to wind, all to hydro, which might be possible in some areas. What would you reply to this? What is your reason that you say that nuclear is actually a key in the development of Africa?
Thank you so much. Greetings to everyone. I like the point that you touched on us skipping everything and just go renewables. Because I always say, what would happen if as African nations, we look at what has developed the developed nations and implement those energy sources? Because for me, I'm more about abundance, energy, and let's look into issues of climate change after, because you cannot control the climate or the pollutions unless you give access to electricity to everyone. That's the only way that you can control it. And yes, it is correct that we are being persuaded to jump and just implement renewables, which I think it's unfair. I advocate for nuclear energy in Africa because I believe in development, I believe in industrialization, and I believe in ending the energy poverty and achieve equality as African continent. And I realized that that will never happen unless we have dispatchable power. And we are going to get that dispatchable clean power in nuclear energy. And that's what I advocate for. And I just wish that all the nations that are here would understand that Africa needs abundance energy. It does not need only weather-dependent energy. Together, we can achieve a lot by an energy mix that involves all these energy technologies that we need going forward.
Now, if you would have to assign blame, let's put it this way, would you say that we have now a lack of competence because we simply did not train the required people, we don't have the engineers? Or would you say the people will still be there, the know-how would still be there, but we have created such a regulatory corset around building nuclear power plants that even though the technological battle has been won, it's the political, the regulatory front on which we are still losing. And by we, I mean the proponents of nuclear energy, of course.
You know, the issue of cost for me is always debatable. If you look at what happened in COP26 in Glasgow, the developed nations gave South Africa, my country, a pledge of $8.5 billion to transition away from fossil fuels and implement renewables. And they are very specific as to which renewables to implement, and it's solar, wind, and batteries. And now you think what would happen if they are not prescriptive in terms of what energy sources we can implement as a country. And then immediately after that pledge was given to South Africa, the country went and developed what they call the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan. And the budget for that plan is about 1.5 to 1.9 trillion rand. And it means that the government must give guarantee to all the independent power producers so that they can be able to get those funds. So it's debatable in such that if it was not prescriptive and include all energy sources, then we would be able to achieve what we want in terms of energy mix.
Let me ask, because we mentioned also kind of the situation in South Africa, and we just heard that, for example, in Korea, right, that they never unlearned building nuclear. I think the Chinese claim that they can build a nuclear power plant in 10 years at about a quarter of the cost compared to the United States. So my question to you is, if we say, okay, Sub-Saharan Africa and other developing countries want to go the nuclear route, who should be their partners? Like, should they look to the United States, should they look to Europe, or should they actually look to Asia, should they look to China? Who would be their preferred partners, or who could be their preferred partners?
I think there's no preferred partners. African countries should go with what make economic sense to them. Whoever comes and bid, because we open the bid for different countries to come and actually pitch. So whatever pitch that makes economic sense, then the African countries should go with it, regardless of whether east or west or south. For me, whatever that makes sense economically, then Africans should go for it.
I think one of the key arguments that is often being made for nuclear is its safety record. We also know that the issue of nuclear waste is one that can be dealt with. But let's assume that we have the quadrupling, maybe a tenfold expansion of nuclear energy. I mean, wouldn't that also by default increase the likelihood of accidents? Doesn't have to be, a massive world-destroying accident. It's like solar panels, right? The more solar panels you have, the more often it happens that people fall off the roof and break their neck when they install solar panels. And if you have more nuclear power plants, the assumption is the likelihood of accidents happening simply goes up accordingly. Now, do you think that even for long-term investors, that they are, of course, very sensitive to the public opinion? Because as we see, for example, in Austria and Germany, governments tend to, like a flag in the wind, kind of turn with public opinion. Nowadays, we ride on a high, right? Public opinion towards nuclear energy is very high, but many remember that just 5 years ago, it was very low. So if you want to make a long-term investment, can you really rely on the public and governments that are sensitive to what the public thinks? That new sentiment will maintain. What happens if you have one accident, one Fukushima again, or one Chernobyl-like thing? As Jonas said, you had the good example. They said 50 years ago, they said, don't do hydro, and now everybody's happy. What if in 20 years, they said do nuclear, and now everybody's unhappy? How can we avoid that from happening?
I think the issue of public perception, it has to do with being transparent. I don't know of any industry or any technology in the energy industry that is as transparent as the nuclear industry. We know how many accidents we've had. We know how many people have died through radiation exposure. We also know where we keep our waste. So I think the only way to influence public perception is when we tell real stories and we talk about what is happening where in the world and not really hide anything. And for me, when we speak about nuclear, the advanced technology reactors, we need to also mention that those advanced reactor technologies, they come with advanced safety features. And that's the only way we can convince public that we are an industry that cares.
I'm sorry if somebody's asked this question before, but you hear a lot about these micro plants, smaller facilities, which are cheaper, quicker to build, and if something does go wrong, they're more containable. Have we discussed this at all? Is this something that is in the future of nuclear industry?
I have been advocating for coal to nuclear a lot. As you know, in South Africa, we are mostly powered by coal, and there are coal power plants that are aging. And we have witnessed a coal power plant being shut down and repurposed with renewables. The coal plant was giving us about 1,000 megawatt, and those renewables, which is wind, solar, and batteries, they are only giving us 350 megawatt. So for me, I advocate for small modular reactors to be repurposing those coal power plants, and we look into issues of leveraging the current infrastructure that we can use for nuclear, and also the workforce development, issues of reskilling and retraining of the current workforce, so that we retain the number of people who work in the coal plant, so that they continue working in the nuclear plant. But now, in closing, I'd like to take you back to the current theme of this session, which is securing our energy future, long-term thinking and nuclear investment. I want to take you back to first and second industrial development. Imagine if we had leaders who did not have vision, who did not think long-term. Would we be gathered here at COP today talking about issues of energy? Because we would not even have energy altogether. So I want the current leaders to also think visionary, to think long-term, and gather all the stakeholders in the energy sector to come together and solve this long-term problem, which is net zero 2050. Thank you so much.
Thank you.